Thank you, Dr. Ghana. It's indeed at once a huge honor and also an humbling experience for me to address such an august gathering. And I'm delighted. And let me wish for the Vice Chancellor, the Registrar, all the fathers, and all my dear colleagues a warm good afternoon. And I hope this next 50 minutes to 1 hour's time would add value to your time, and also hopefully you would be able to take some insights to reflect upon as you go ahead into the academic year. Yeah, Ghana ma'am, could you tell me whether the slide is visible?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Thank you, ma'am. Yeah. So there's actually, I should thank the leadership chair for initiating such a thought in me to look at privilege, because this is also a result of one of the workshops that they conducted, the one on servant leadership. And I was also having some exposure to peace studies wherein these set of issues were constantly coming back to my consciousness, and I thought I should address this, and this came across as a great opportunity to bring them together and address. So thanks to the leadership chair for stimulating such new possibilities. Yeah, I came across this particular article where they talk about the future of leadership, and they have enlisted 3 specific points, and they give 3 qualities as the ones that are going to decide the future of leadership. And the first one that they refer to is the ability to motivate staff, which I think all of us would understand as a necessity, and perhaps it's a perennial concern. On the other hand, the ability to work well across cultures is something that may not have been that significant a concern probably a few decades ago. Now it has become an extremely crucial concern. And in this context, that we need to relook at something like privilege and how privilege as a subject of many of the for example, Harvard has a series of studies about privilege, and likewise, if you look at some of the big companies, many of them tend to look at their diversity quotient, inclusivity quotient, and many such things. So the area that we are working on is something that is contemporary and something of significance for our own well-being as an institution. And the ability to facilitate change is the other thing, and I'm sure all of us are aware, given the series of inexplicable changes that are happening and how we are trying to take control over it despite the limitations. I would request all of you to take a few minutes, maybe 4 to 5 minutes, and probably watch this video and then come back. I have just put this in the chat box. May I request all of you to see this particular video and then come back? I could show that, but maybe the buffering could be an irritation for some of us. So it's better that you watch it and come back. Now it's 3:06 on my laptop, and I hope we could be back 3:07. We could be back by 3:12, and yeah, then we'll have a follow-up from there on. Thank you. I hope all have seen. May take quick feedback from all of you. If you could just share a one-line response to the video, and what is your thought based on that. Those who are willing to, please put in your responses, please. Thank you, sir. Yeah. Empathy, yes. There is a need for sensitization, as Vijayalaya sir is pointing out. I guess all of us are unique, of course. Differences give us new opportunities to collaborate. Yes. That's a very positive take, ma'am. Thank you. So ma'am is stressing on the need for diversity and how diversity could add more wealth to our own common coexistence. Understanding the differences is one of the first steps that we need to take, as Grishma ma'am is pointing out. And as Greta ma'am is asking, am I aware of the background challenges people have around me? The need for reflection, which is crucial. And as Anusha ma'am is pointing out, some have privileges over others. I mean, by birth, perhaps we would have privileges, and that's something that we need to be reflective of. Yes, different backgrounds, different shoes, different needs, understanding differences. Yes, thank you so much for all of to all those who have responded. I'm sure others are gathering their thoughts and are probably working on it. And we need to be friends to understand differences. That's another important thing that Anil sir has pointed out. Differences would be there, but how do we interpret the difference and how do we handle the difference? That's another important aspect for all of us to ponder over. Yes, so sometimes we are a caterpillar, and means we could be privileged, and we might have snails around us. And how do we look at those snails, and how do we respond to those snails? Sometimes we could be snails, and how do we articulate our limitations based on things that are beyond our control to, say, the caterpillars who are around us? How do we try to create a conducive space for mutual learning, growth, and healthy coexistence? That's exactly what we are trying to look at in today's context. Robin DiAngelo, one of very renowned thinkers in the domain of privilege, is claiming that if we are benefactors of privilege, the current in the water is going in our direction. The society is set up to affirm, accommodate, and reward the norms of our group. People like us are bound to be more supported, and they would get an advantage. Anyone who has ever swum with a current knows that the current makes swimming so much easier. On the other hand, there could be snails amongst us who have to swim against the current for no reason that they have control over. So that's the crux of what we are looking at today. In the words of Peggy McIntosh, privilege could be called as the invisible package of unearned assets. I think each of these words have a huge amount of value, and maybe we need to spend some time reflecting over all of that. Yes, privilege is an asset. So if, I mean, maybe I could go into my personal context and bring in a few reflections, and probably that could trigger some reflection in others as well. I distinctly remember going to my grandmother's house as a small boy, along with my sister and family. And my uncle's house was opposite my grandmother's house, and we were there in my uncle's house. My grandmother suddenly called me in a very low tone, probably trying to call me alone, leaving out the others. My cousins were as well around. Then I went to her, and she hid something, and then she took it out and gave me some snacks to eat. I was a little taken aback because they were my cousins and sister, and why is she choosing to single me out and give it to her, give it to me? Then I said no, I couldn't take it that time being given some kind of a special attention and some supply of snacks, leaving out my own cousins and sister. And so I protested and I came out, and I could not process it well at that particular point because I was too young. And then later it struck me that I was the only boy amongst the entire group then. And so for her, the boy child has to be given more nourishment, and so she would single out me and give me such things. And this was not the only occasion, there were other occasions as well. And my sister and my other cousins were left out for no fault of theirs. And I hope that gives a very clear indication of how privilege works. In the case that I was referring to, it was male privilege that was at work, and that's exactly what Peggy McIntosh would call to be an asset. And it is an unearned asset. I did not choose to be a male. I did not work towards becoming a male. It just happened. It is biological, and that's beyond anyone's planning, right? So it's an unearned asset that I had at the particular moment, right? And it's not just unearned assets. It comes as a package. It's not just with regard to getting snacks or being the blue-eyed boy in the eye of my grandmother. It works in many other contexts. For example, I could go out of my house even at 11 in the night and then come back all alone. But that's not a privilege that many, my sister could have, for instance, right? So there are many other things that come along with this privilege. So privilege is multifaceted, and most often this is invisible. It is invisibilized, if I could use the term, by the society, by social structures that have been put in place. when we are part of a patriarchal structure, we wouldn't realize that men are getting some amount of privilege just because they are men. Even today, we know what is the equation in the parliament. Kanimozhi, who happens to be an MP from Tamil Nadu, has been repeatedly asking what happened to that 33% that you promised a long time ago. And that question gets sidelined as usual. Right, and it's not just that occasion. Now, when I'm saying this, it's easy for some of us to immediately think about what about Mamata Banerjee, what about Sonia Gandhi, what about Jayalalitha, what about Mayawati, and you would say that haven't women succeeded? How about PV Sindhu? How about Mary Kom? You might come up with those examples, but when we look at it statistically in terms of data, we are very clearly able to see a pattern. These people are exceptions, and thereby we cannot treat them as examples of womankind as such. So they are succeeding despite the difficulties that are there around us, and not because the system is enabling them to shine the way they are shining. So we need to be looking at privilege more closely and try to find out how is it becoming invisibilized, and how can it be better understood, and how should people who are having privilege better respond to such challenging context for the disadvantaged in our own society. Now, privilege is usually framed in relational terms. It's not as though somebody gets privilege and it stops there. There is an other who is at work. For instance, in the case of race, when you're talking about racism, if, let's say, the Afro-Americans have been oppressed structurally for many, many generations together, it is because there is white privilege at work. So white privilege is there, and there is oppression of the Afro-Americans at work. So that's something that needs to be taken account. We are aware that after almost 200 years or so, you had the first Afro-American president of US, that is Barack Obama, right? And that would again be seen as an exception, because saw the realities of the blacks in the US context in many, many ways, even last year, right? Somebody could just stamp on a small-time criminal, perhaps, on the throat, and hold that person's life for 8 minutes, and then crush the person's life to death, right? So, and this is happening in the open, and many custodial deaths of the Afro-Americans is statistically available to tell us how this is structurally a problem. It's not to say that the people say who are criminals coming from some specific races should be exempted or any such thing. That's not the call. The point is that they are bound to be more punished for the sake of coming from particular groups. So that's what we are referring to. So social structures bestow privilege over certain groups. Now we need to study this social structure. How is it set up? Or who sets it up? And how does it work in favor of some people? How does it work against some people? That's something that we need to probably look more closely. Over a period of time, privilege becomes common sense. Going back to the Afro-American case, in the 1960s, it was common sense in the US that Afro-American children should study in a separate school. Whites should study in a separate school. And this was common sense, and nobody questioned, because that was the norm. It is as though people were thinking like fish in a water medium. When a particular ideology is so deeply entrenched, people can only think through that medium. It becomes common sense. So there is a need for tearing apart those layers and trying to see things in its multidimensionality, in its complexity. So privilege studies is, by the way, an area that is emerging majorly in humanities and social sciences, and it's mostly the lead is taken by people who are working at the intersection of sociology and psychology, social psychology, and that's the area where privilege studies is predominantly worked upon, and that's something that maybe we could look at as an area for us to focus on if we think that the rationale is there. Usually hesitant to talk about privilege because those who are privileged may not want to give up their privileges, and it's probably human nature to stick on to that and cherish the advantages that we get because of that, and so we may not speak. For example, somebody who is standing in a queue let's say, right? I mean, maybe a small example could be what happens in our own central block of the central campus. There could be a long queue. Once the teacher comes in, automatically others part ways, and we go ahead and then we go to wherever we have to go. Now, which is okay, provided we have classes and there are 70 and odd students waiting. And so that makes the rationale clear, because our context is different and we need to be given that privilege. But there are occasions when the teacher is having a coffee in hand or a samosa and other such things in hand, and students are in two minds. I have a class, should I be giving way for the teacher, all that. So how do we exercise our privilege? When to exercise it? When should we be giving up on our privileges? These are questions that we need to look at. That's a small example, but it can manifest in many ways in outside our institutional context as well. Who is able to get a rented house easily? Who is not able to get a rented house in Bangalore, for instance, right? Is it based on language? Is it based on sexuality? Is it based on the region from where they come? Is it because of the kind of food that they eat? There are many such equations at work, even in trying to get a house. I have had small difficulties because of being a non-vegetarian in finding a house. But I've heard from my friends that they were not given a house based on their background. When I say background, it could be caste, religion, and other such factors. So many such things do operate in our society. And unfortunately, we are trained not to talk about this. And we think that we are crossing a line when we talk about this. But those are harsh, unacceptable realities, and we are not able to talk about that. For instance, in the US, talk about multiracial coexistence is a very integral part of the academics, and also an integral part of social movements like civic groups. But that's not the way in which it is played out in the Indian context. And so there is a great need for us to deeply reflect on these issues and address social justice. What do we mean by social justice here? It is a call for full and equitable participation of all sections of our society. How do we create that? It's going to be a challenge, of course, but we need to be more attentive to the things that happen beneath the surface, and thereby try to respond to this. It is a necessary step towards creating a culture of servant leadership, because servant leadership believes in understanding the other and trying to get optimum things done through mutual understanding and growth. So given these contexts, it is something that we'll have to address as one of our prime concerns. Now, I'm almost on the verge of finishing it, but I think we can take up a lot of questions. These are my recommendations. It could be something that some agree upon, some do not agree upon, which is fine, but then let me put it forward so that it stimulates some interesting conversations. First thing could be to listen to those who are unlike us, and maybe talk amongst ourselves, people like us, and find out why we look at the other the way we look at them, right? And also seek reflection. I mean, after having listened to them, trying to process it. Why is this person feeling offended when I say this? Why is this person not participating in these events? Why is this person always touchy about going to that space? There are many such equations that need to be unpacked and reflected upon. And through those kind of experiences, we have to learn a lot. And as an institution, we could have more rigorous practices to promote inclusivity and diversity. And as I mentioned, a lot of companies take pride in showcasing their diversity and inclusivity. And there are organizations where they have somebody to address these as with a post. There are people who are called as the diversity management officer and other such things. So there are posts exclusively allocated for ensuring diversity. Now, this is not just a social justice initiative. It is also, as I think Greta ma'am was hinting at, or probably Anita ma'am was hinting at, a way of ensuring that there is more wealth of knowledge and practice that comes into the system, because people with the same kind of a thinking could probably indulge in some kind of an inbreeding, and only when diverse people come into any group, there is bound to be greater ideas, flow of greater ideas and better quality of work as well. So it is that way as well beneficial. And of course, we need to probably look at creating full and equitable opportunities for all in a non-negotiable form. Once we go for ifs and buts, we might be making huge compromises, and maybe we need to make full and equitable opportunities a reality for all involved. And of course, as academicians, we have a huge role to play in terms of creating privilege awareness. In the domain of privilege studies itself, this is something that they are holding as a very inherent value. For a long time, they were looking at those in our society who are being marginalized and studying about them. But then who is the receiver? And when they found out that most of the people who are receiving it are the privileged people, and they are experientially disconnected with regard to the context of the disadvantage. So that's where it became a more of a self-reflexive process, and that's how privilege studies itself came to be set up as a domain of rigorous engagement. So there is need for privilege awareness, and I think students would also gain a lot by being exposed to privilege, to their own privileges and how they could handle it. How do we handle a privilege? That's another question. Maybe we could probably give up on certain privileges that we can afford to give up, and probably be more sensitive, as someone was putting it very early, to the context of those who are disadvantaged in our own communities. So those are my submissions, and yes, I'm open for questions and interaction. I hope we can have a more productive interaction the next 20 to 30 minutes. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Padmakumar. I think you laid the ground very well for us to understand what privilege essentially is conceptually.
Yes, we can.
And following that, of course.
Yes, sir. Tell me, sir. I have your number. Tell me, sir.
Vijayalia, sir, would you please mute? Yeah. And then you went on to talk to us about the disciplinary field of privilege studies and how we should probably inaugurate something of that kind in a more forceful manner as our academic conversations. We can begin with some questions. I think if there are any of our audience members who would want to ask a question, you may please unmute yourself and address it to Mr. Padmakumar. Okay, maybe while we have our colleagues think about certain things that they want to ask you, I just want you to probably reflect on this a little bit. How do you think our own academic disciplinary orientations shape our understanding of privilege, our access to privilege, and also how we could counter some of those issues that may emerge when we do not recognize that privilege?
Yes, thank you. That's a brilliant question, Ghana ma'am. I think as academicians, we ought to ask this question about the disciplinary foundation of, the foundation of our disciplines and how they respond to the context that we are discussing. Most of the disciplines that have been founded that we are having access to have come from the West. And so it made sense for their context, and from there it has been drawn and then transplanted into our framework. And because it works at some level, we are using it perhaps not with much of reflection. Take, for instance, the domain of anthropology. Prior to that, we had a field called craniology. Craniology was a field, as you would know, where they were interpreting that based on the size of the human skull of particular races, they can interpret that if the skull is big, then the brain is big. And if the brain is big, then the thinking of that person is big, and thereby the race is superior. So they were coming with these kind of very problematic assertions. And then there came anthropology, wherein in the case of anthropology, what they did was to go and study races or communities which are more primordial. And so they used to, they felt that probably our origin could be understood better by trying to understand this particular community or race. So they went on to do those studies. And so they were actually theorizing how these people were. And this theorizing on the part of the West ended up stereotyping certain groups. as you would know, Orientalism itself had to come up as a response to how the West was trying to interpret the East and say that India is a land of snake charmers, of splendid richness and pathetic existence of the commoners. They were coming up with these observations, and it's a trope that has continued even into films like Slumdog Millionaire, for that matter, right? And there is a lot more complexity, and there is a lot more to India, but that's a way in which they straitjacketed the idea of India. So privilege as a subject of discussion also has been framed by such a disciplinary context. So they have the notion that this is how the human mind perhaps is to be understood based on certain parameters, and which is true in certain contexts, but it's extremely problematic in certain. Cultural psychology is a domain that is trying to respond to these challenges very interestingly in recent times. But there were a series of problems in the past, and people get stuck with that. Even now, I do remember some of my friends in other institutions talking about anatomy is biology based on Freud's early writings. So there are these sort of issues which tend to add fuel to the privileges that exist in our society, and one needs to be more conscious of why certain things have become what they have become. We need to be very suspicious of where knowledge comes from and why it is framed this way, and who is telling whom what, and trying to get a more rigorous sense of whatever we are engaging with.
Okay, I think there are a few questions here. Dr. Pinto asks, what are the challenges of privileged studies in India?
Okay, so privileged studies as a domain, as far as, I have very limited understanding. From what I gather, privileged studies does not seem to exist in any of the Indian educational institutions. We only have probably studies about the marginalized communities and all that, but we don't have privileged studies as a domain, but there is a great need for it. Even this is something that is now coming from the West. Even the examples that I had to give are from the West. Peggy McIntosh, or for the matter, Richard D'Angelo are all from the West, which is okay. I mean, if you can borrow model from there, that's okay. But content has to be something that is from our own context, and that's when it will become more relevant. So that's something that we need to definitely look into and work upon. And each of our fields have the potential to look at it and make better sense. So that's an unexplored area, if I could put it that way, in the Indian context. And it should not be something that is limited to humanities and social sciences. This is something that needs to be opened up into the domains of management, in the domain of science. For example, interesting science today is done that way. Like if a scientist for working the lab alone have this assumption that I know what is happening with regard to this flora, this fauna, then they are terribly bound to be limited. So they need to probably talk to the people who are coming from the belts in which that flora and fauna is thriving. And so they have a lot of interesting observations, and they need to be taken as rightful partners in that process of getting a scientific investigation. So that's a way to go about and not probably put ourselves in pedestal because we are in academic chairs.
Okay, I think Dr. Pinto also has a follow-up question. Dr. Pinto, you could ask your question. I'm so sorry to have voiced your question without asking. So I think you can make it a little more conversational.
Yeah, no, my question was, how do India established and incorporated large companies look at diversity? Because when we say there are diversity officers, at least my knowledge is that this is largely mandated within socially or sometimes legally mandated for the company established in the US and some of the other countries. So, what is the scenario in the Indian established in the Indian, scenario among the companies which are India established, incorporated? And do we have cases of them very significantly promoting diversity? To what extent? This also flows from an understanding of diversity is many times seen as purely a gender diversity and not beyond that. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, sir. That's an interesting observation that you're making. You're right. As you're pointing out, gender diversity is something that they take into account, and that's male-female gender diversity that they attend to. And disability is another area that they are also attending to. In quite a few companies, they're now open to the idea of having people who come from some physically challenged background, and they accommodate them. But when you're talking about how privilege operates and how disadvantaged communities operate, there is a huge variety that needs to be taken into account. So companies choose what is convenient for them and leave out many other areas which are very delicate to handle. So they leave them out, and that's a matter of concern. As I was mentioning, in the US, they do accommodate people coming from multiracial backgrounds, people from differently abled backgrounds, people from different sexuality backgrounds, and all that. That's the way in which the idea of diversity is understood. But unfortunately, in India, even in the small companies that have the platform for accommodating diversity, they make it very narrow, and that's a matter of concern indeed. Yeah.
Dr. Madhumati, would you want to ask your question?
Sure, ma'am. I think I'll just give it a voice. My question was about, we talk about privilege, and we talk about how we should look at it from another viewpoint. But when the hierarchical setup that we promote in the society and in the institutions that we are, either we belong to or we work for, or whatever it may be, how do we break that hierarchical setup to actually acknowledge and accept privilege and even try to mitigate that or work through that? How do we do that? That's the challenge I think most of us face, is that yes, there are people who are from the privileged sector, but they don't want to accept it. I think Suparna ma'am was pointing out here, that itself is a challenge to show that there are some privileged classes and there are some, but because they either not accept it or acknowledge it or even want to break it down. So how do we overcome that challenge is my question.
Okay. I'll try to answer this, ma'am. My gut, this is not a well thought out response, but for the moment, I think this is what I could present as a response. Hierarchies are there and bound to be there, and in any institutional organizational context, it's needed as well for executing some set of things. And we need to respect that. As long as it stays as a functional element, it's absolutely fine. The moment we try to extend that into other contexts and proclaim that, this hierarchy is operational in every sense of the term, then it could become a serious problem. Maybe that is something that we'll have to be more reflective of and look at. And how to break this structure as such, social structure as such, is probably by bringing about some amount of policy difference and creating awareness. Those are the things that we should probably address, and maybe more policy enabling elements should be there for addressing privilege as a matter of concern.
Thank you, sir.
Dr. Divya also has posed a question. Dr. Divya, would you want to ask your question?
Yeah, thank you, Gana ma'am. Thank you, Padma Kumar sir, for that wonderful presentation. So, I have been coming across quite some number of studies, especially on the corporate sector, where they talk about how gender diversity and, more diverse workspaces turn out to be high-performing firms, and they kind of add a lot to productivity. I think even when we all sit in admission panels, to just draw a parallel, we do often think about whether a student would be really fitting into our mold and will be able to, interact with other students who come from more homogeneous backgrounds, and whether language will become a hurdle, whether they will be able to perform well, whether they would, put in a good score or a grade. So my question is largely arising from some of these issues, and what is really important when we talk about promoting inclusion, a more inclusive space, be it an educational space or a workspace. Are we looking at it as an end in itself, as a matter of social justice, or are we trying to only look at some instrumental outcomes of inclusion because it helps us to achieve certain XYZ outcomes, therefore we promote it? I mean, my question was largely about that. Thank you.
Right. I got that. Yeah, thank you. That's a very important question to address. I mean, ideally, it ought to be social justice that drives our call for more inclusion and more diversity in any of our setups. And if there are benefits as well, it might convince the people who are going to decide the policies as well, because unfortunately, measurements, standardized procedures, and outcome-based evaluations have become the norm in many contexts. The managerial modes of assessing even the quality of life have come into the picture, and given these contexts, those kind of justifications are brought out. But I agree with you that it ought to be more of social justice concern than the benefit related reading of the whole context. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, Dr. Vageshwari
you.
also
Thank you very
has a question. Ma'am, would you want to ask your question?
Yeah, thank you, Gana ma'am. Thank you, Padma Kumar sir, for a wonderful presentation. My question is in the context or background of the way education has been considered more as a tool in the larger corporate and globalized world. So the privilege studies offers us a very important insight into how do we manage our social understanding, social identities, etc. So can we incorporate or can we superimpose these understanding of privilege studies into the kind of privileging of academic disciplines that are happening across the world? Okay, can we borrow the same tools of argument from privilege studies and use it to bring in a much more sensible understanding of what an academic discourse ought to be? That's
okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. That's a brilliant question. I think you are asking about the hierarchy of knowledge systems that have come to work in our times and spaces. Am I right?
Yes.
If I
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah. So that's an excellent area to work upon. I mean, there are certain disciplines which have dominated in certain phases, and some disciplines tend to be very dominant in our times, and we are aware of it. And so that does not allow us to holistically thrive. And that's something that has to be definitely attended to. And if you would like to work on it, I mean, if you're planning to work on it, ma'am, please do call me. I'll also be happy to collaborate and work on. That's something that I'm sure many others are also keen on working on that. Each knowledge domain, I mean, we may not be able to say each knowledge domain, but quite a lot of knowledge domains have their own veracity, a legitimate role to play. But some of the other market forces and other elements come to play, and they dictate how which one has to be celebrated or which one has to be looked down upon, and all that. And it plays out even in the way our students make their choices. I've come across quite a few students tell us during the interview that, sir, this is something that I fought for. And I asked, why should you fight for choosing a course? And then they say that my parents, my relatives, all of them told that that's the better course because that's more promising, whereas this is something that is not bound to give you a bright future, and so maybe you should choose that. So that plays out even at a very commonsensical level. The biggest challenge is with regard to the languages. A lot of languages are falling apart, dying, primarily because there is no support. When I say support, there are no opportunities for those people who are working in those language sectors. And even if they work on it, I mean, there is no opportunity even to study as well. That's something that we need to really worry about and see how those things have to be attended to as well.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Thank you.
Dr. Pinto has also identified, PK, that you have looked for a potentially collaborative project as a part of this conversation as well.
Yes, I'll have to thank Father Joseph for giving this idea about collaborations, because I mean, these are things that we used to singularly painfully reflect over and stop over there. But I think when we find people with like-minded positions, we can definitely collaborate and work. Thank you, Father.
Okay, I think Dr. Suparna has made a comment. It's not a question. Dr. Suparna, would you want to raise the point you have made here?
So Gana ma'am, this was more of a comment because I was looking at how, just the recognition and acknowledgement of how privilege operates is a huge challenge. This is something that we've recognized in our courses as well. For instance, one of the things that we do with undergraduate students of sociology is to actually have them design a privilege walk for the Indian context, which actually ties in with what Padma Kumar sir was also saying, that we really don't have too much of work in the Indian context, which works in two ways. It helps the students to also acknowledge how privilege is constructed in our society, but it also has it has a negative side as well, because for students who might be at the other end of the spectrum, this may be a very uncomfortable kind of scenario. So this is an area that we really need to engage with academically. And Padma Kumar sir, if you do take up this project on looking at disciplines itself and how privilege works, that would be something that we would want to work with as well. Thank you for this opportunity, Gana ma'am.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. It's really heartwarming to know that sociology department is having some components with regard to privilege, and I had also tried out a few things in some of my classes, though the syllabus was only partially lending itself to it. We try to create a context because there's a need in terms of social sensitization, and so that's how it was included. And probably we need to look at the privilege of certain disciplines and not necessarily privilege within disciplines. I mean, how is privilege looked at within disciplines? So maybe we need to look at both as well. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, and Dr. Finzi has also pointed out something here that might be worth considering. Dr. Finzi, do you want to share your idea?
Yeah, thank you so much, ma'am. So when the question was raised by the registrar with reference to whether there is any legislation or the provisions in the statutes which mandate for diversity and inclusion in the management side, I thought of putting it across. So that's why I have written, there are provisions in the Indian Companies Act in order to enable the representation of various classes or categories of shareholders in the board of managements, or to ensure better governance. There are kind of directors identified and mandated for public listed companies. So from the corporate side, there is a legislative requirement. Hence, the public listed companies have to have representation from diverse background. That's the point I thought of bringing it across. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, and I think Ms. Anusha also has made a point, especially in the context of management. Would you want to share your idea, ma'am?
Thank you, Gana ma'am. Good afternoon, Gana ma'am. Good afternoon, PK sir. This was a very, in fact, when I listened to your conversation, your discussion today, without even knowing that there is something called a privilege concept, it was while working throughout across all types of jobs that we do in management. Also, we realized that something of this concept has been happening. Sometimes we do not communicate it, sometimes we don't voice it out, but this is something that we feel. At times, if you're working in a part of a committee, or just by virtue of being in a position where you have a little bit more information than others, sometimes there's always this integrity check that we also have to have on ourselves, saying not to use those privileges to our advantage. So yes, of course, in management also this particular concept comes. Also, another thing that I wanted to say it aloud is, for instance, the analogy that you gave where in a queue you are standing and there is a higher up coming in the queue. Maybe a student, would he have to wait, etc. So again, there is a question as in how much of time are you going to lose here by standing in a line in comparison to a student wasting a time? So this is, again, everybody's time is equally precious. So with regard to time management or decision making, etc., within the genre of management also, this concept is extremely useful, is what I wanted to tell. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I think one last comment from Dr. Karthikey Prakasam, sir, if you're here and you want to share your ideas.
I just shared my thoughts on privileges, because privilege is also required. It's not that we can completely rule out, because privilege, at least it should be there with few people, that so that, as Anisha ma'am told and even others pointed out, so we will be in a better position to take decisions, and we'll have concern for others, because somebody has to voice it out, and that few of them should have that privilege. So if nobody has that privilege, then it becomes a chaos, that the condition may not be good, is what is my opinion. I may be wrong, but still, that's my opinion on that. Thank you.
Yes, sir. As long as it's contextually legitimized, when I say, I mean, if it's for a functional purpose, then maybe it makes sense. Beyond that, to extend it and to use it in all-pervasive mode, that's when the problems, of course, arise. Ghana ma'am, if you could alert me just before winding up, I just wanted to post 2 questions for reflection.
Yeah, I think there is one more comment which is
Sure,
made
sure.
by Dr. Rashmi. Would you want to share your point?
Yeah, no, it's just, it's been such a wonderfully provocative and stimulating session. So thank you to both of you for that. I think there's a long way for us to go, a lot of work to be done, very necessary, and kind of ironic that given the intensity and variety of discriminations and privileges in India, that we are not able to identify a body of work that addresses this, which I find very fascinating, this whole quandary of not having privileged studies here. My only comment was that, as we think of doing research and studies, it would also be, I think it would make the ground level difference to actually implement some positive actions, which perhaps are also necessary in the international context if we want to position ourselves as a university of international competence. Simple things like childcare facilities and so on. I think it's really the trickle down effect. That's all that I wanted to say, that we would make a very wonderful thing out of this if the study is accompanied by action. Thank you.
Thank you, Rashmi ma'am. Thank you. I just wanted to pose 2 questions for all of us to reflect on. What are the privileges we individually have, and how are we going to deal with it from here on, now that there is some amount of reflection we have collectively had? It's easy for us to take the guilt route and say that, oh, I am this privileged, I'm coming from this section of the society, how do I do, and all that. It doesn't mean that you can undo certain things. It's there, but how do we respond with that privilege to the people who are disadvantaged in our own society? That's something that we'll have to take into account. And it need not take the mansplaining kind of route, wherein we go about speaking for the other without even listening to the other and encouraging them to speak. Maybe those are also things that we'll have to look into while addressing the complex challenge that is in front of us. So, thank you.
Okay, if there are no other questions, I think, PK, you have been able to clearly lay out quite a lot of ideas for all of us to take away. And it's always fascinating to have a humanities spin on many of these concepts, and these conversations, I hope, will definitely continue. And I'm just trying to, refigure what Martha Nussbaum had envisioned. Humanity's presence in the 21st century is a necessity towards realizing a democratic citizenship, as she says. So I think we should all try to see how we can bring in the humanities into other disciplines as we continue to take from other disciplines into the humanities as well.